Hello and welcome back to another episode of Strong Collectors Comics. My name is Jordan and I'm joined today as ever by my plucky co-host Dakota. An article has recently hit from the Wall Street Journal talking a bit about the behind the scenes of the MCU over the past few years. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast or some of our chatter, maybe me more so than Dakota, has been a bit disaffected by the MCU over the past few years. Probably more so in the past year has really been hitting me. But I think the general consensus is kind of that there has been a lot more projects and a lot fewer quality standout projects. I don't know if we can agree on that, Dakota. Maybe not.
Yeah.
In comparison, maybe
sure,
you don't agree with
I
me.
guess.
That's okay.
Yeah. I think you do have your grumpy pants on pretty tight when it comes to the MCU, buddy.
Right.
But I can agree it is not as good as it was, but I just also think there's some rose-colored glasses there. Carry on.
Okay, all right. Well, our listeners, you can weigh in because as someone, I saw Iron Man in theaters in 2008. I followed along, and I remember that journey going through. And yes, there could be moments that weren't as good, but I feel overall the MCU's felt a lot more consistent. I feel like even though so-so ones, you'd still be like, I enjoyed it, whatever. For me, again, maybe it's just me, I felt like it was more stand out over the past few years for me to be like, oh, I really like that, or that one stood out to me. Now, I was doing some looking, and between 2021, I believe, to now, there have been, if you total it, Dakota, 13 Marvel movies, which to me, that is a lot of movies in not a very large amount of time. I think that's a lot.
Movies, you said, not just projects?
Movies, and then you got shows added in there, and that ends up being like...
Really?
Yeah, it's quite a bit. We can look at the data, but we can go over them. But you got at least, every year there were like 3 or so.
Yeah.
So 3 times 4 is 12 with one where you threw one in there.
Yeah.
So around that number, if I'm not exactly right. But this article kind of talked about reports saying Kevin Feige did feel a little pressured from Disney coming in to say, we got to put out more content, and was like, I kind of want to go along with this, being more of the corporate guy, please the shareholders, the company.
Right.
And had felt like a lot of times he was not able to be checking in with projects. So similar, I think this would make sense with Daredevil, remember, where they were a bit into it before he checked in and was like, oh, what are you guys doing? And then they restarted, and I think made it probably closer to what he would have pushed for in the beginning. Mm-hmm. I still think there were some things they weren't able to iron out with that, but I think overall, to me, it speaks to how the projects used to be, where I think he was able to kind of monitor as it went along and really like how it would tie in. Because we've made that joke how, there's the 8 to 10 post-credit scenes. It's like, you're never going to see this again, right? And I think he was pretty careful in the early days. You'd be like, if we're going to put something in here, it is going to pay off relatively soon, or we do have maybe an idea of where it's
because
going.
that has been pretty annoying, where it's like, oh, there's Black Knight, haven't seen him yet. Oh, there's Star Fox, haven't seen him. There's Clea, haven't seen her. Where are all these characters at?
Right. Hercules, never seen him again.
Haven't seen him.
Right. So, to me, that makes a lot of sense as I read that, because I think for what he was able to do with the MCU early on, as you know, it's quite impressive to take all these characters, to take all these stories, to meld them together, to make it cohesive, to make it build. And I don't think somebody just loses the ability to do that. I think he's had that ability. I would totally believe, though, if he was like, I'm trying to maintain all this stuff, I'm trying to check on all these shows, all these movies, and it's too much now.
Yeah. Which,
to address your grumpy pants comment, Dakota, I think makes me a little less grumpy and a little more hopeful when he says I think it was snuck in there, him saying he's got like a 10-year plan for the X-Men. Which, I don't know how people feel about that, but I do like the idea of him being like, in the same way I had this grand vision for the Avengers for this iteration, I do have a plan for where I'd like to see the X-Men go as we introduce them into the MCU. So that gives me a bit of excitement. I think it makes me feel more hopeful in acknowledging like a bit of a course correction, beyond just like, because I think that's what the DCEU did. They never would be like, sorry guys, we really couldn't hack that, we're changing. It was like, we're kind of going to keep doing it, and then like, oh, we're going to pivot like last minute, rather than, hey, let's sit down, let's reevaluate kind of our vision, our direction, make a new game plan, and then stick to it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I also feel like I don't necessarily blame Kevin Feige for being stretched so thin, because if I'm in that situation and Disney says, hey, we're throwing all these projects out here,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do what I can to still be the head of Marvel and
Right.
like keep that position, because that's got to be a super cool thing to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he's like, oh no, I can't be doing this, and like if he probably rightly knows like, oh, this is not going to turn out as good as the other stuff was,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be like, all right, you're out, we're bringing somebody else in.
Yeah.
And there's nothing he couldn't have helped it at that point either. So I don't.
No.
I would put that more on the Disney overlords more so than Kevin Feige himself.
Yeah, that's a fair point too, because if he was like, well, I can at least keep this narrative somewhat going, rather than
Sure.
you bring in some corporate guy that doesn't care about these, and you got Michael Bay doing, Ant-Man 3. Well, I don't know. Michael Bay, Ant-Man 3. Who knows what that would have been like, but he probably would have had fun.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think that part to me makes sense. And I do hope that they can streamline, even within the shows, I like this approach of them saying they're moving to what it seems like is more of the limited series. Almost feels like a mini series rather than like, here's Wonder Man season 1 and we're going to do Wonder Man season 2 and 3. It seems like their approach is more like, here's the Wonder Man limited series to introduce him, and then we can do stuff beyond that, but it's not necessarily a season of a TV show, we're getting season 2, 3.
Sure.
That
introduce
kind
him
of
in that way so that it makes sense when he gets recruited into West Coast Avengers, and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, I know that guy from this thing.
Yeah, because I think TV is a great medium for that. I think you just need to, and that's always been the difficult part with the MCU, right? Is the longer it goes, the more stuff there is to like catch up on. I think
Right.
it would take you almost like a solid week to watch all the MCU content to be caught up.
Right. Yeah.
So that is tricky. I do think the X-Men, whatever that's going to look like, I mean, I know you've had your blow the universe up and reset it in Secret Wars idea, which could be a good, if you do that and then you introduce the X-Men, it's kind of like a clean slate to jump on.
Yeah.
And if they're new iterations of the X-Men, to follow them without necessarily all the backstory and continuity from all the other stuff.
Or I could see if there's like something with, not Doomsday, but the one after the Secret Wars, when whatever the Big Bang happens, it's something that like kickstarts everybody's X gene. But then how do you have Professor X having, how is he then a mentor? It seems like everybody starts at like day one.
Yeah. I feel like
'cause
you
then
need
where
like
has
a
he
House
been
of
for all
M
this?
style thing at that point, where it just creates a new, slightly altered timeline, perhaps.
Yeah, true,
I don't know.
guess. Yeah,
That's
it'll be
tough.
interesting to see how he actually pulls that off, because I don't see how it blends well right now with current MCU. I was going to say, though, with the way the MCU is now, where you have your grumpy pants on, and I think that's, in some cases, rightly, you can have your grumpy pants on for some of the things.
Yeah.
But I think, or do you think that it's sort of reminiscent of like comic books too, where it's like you're going into every movie saying this is supposed to be for me, but you don't go into every comic book being like, oh yes, I love every comic book series that Marvel's putting out right now,
Right.
And not just because they're bad stories, but just because they're not necessarily for you. Do you think that's kind
It's
of
not for kids.
Do you think that, right, exactly. Do you think that kind of they got so big up to Endgame, and then they said, all right, now we can, because I think they did like really spread out and be like, okay, we can do, like, I don't know if New Mutants is necessarily under the MCU umbrella, but that's kind of like a little bit more thriller horror-ish. But like, I know Doctor Strange was trying to be a little bit more like that too.
Yeah.
I think Moon Knight was a little bit more like psychological.
Yeah.
I think She-Hulk was a little more sitcom-y.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of people got like upset, because they're like, oh, She-Hulk this isn't the same as Endgame. It's like
Right.
She-Hulk comics aren't the same as Infinity War comics.
Well, yeah. I mean, I do think there's something to be said for doing different tones, and I would argue, I think even within some of these different tones, the quality has not been as maintained. You and I we could have a whole debate night
Sure.
about Agatha, Dakota. We could put that on here one night. But
Commenters,
yeah.
defend Agatha in the comments, please.
Oh, yeah, please. I need some solid arguments for it. But yeah, I think that is true because I agree with that comic thing. It's like in the same way that comics, yeah, there's some that I don't pick up every comic, right? And I don't like every comic. So in the same way, is it okay to say, hey, there's these MCU movies, there's these MCU shows, and maybe that one's not for me, and I don't have to see it. I think that was an adjustment for me going from, like, obviously watching every piece of content, all the movies, all the shows, seeing it build, and then maybe getting into that space of, like, well, maybe that's okay, this one's not for me, Dakota. And I think I have come to terms with that a little bit.
And I think that is harder to do with the
Yeah.
MCU versus like I understand it's not like a 1-to-1 comparison
Right.
because if you do like She-Hulk and you're setting up like Hulk has a son at the end of that, and then you go to the next Hulk movie and Hulk has a son and you're kind of like, what the heck happened here? Who's that guy? Like that doesn't make as much sense when you're trying to tie everything all together. But I think if they would just do things like The Werewolf by Night was kind of just its own thing. Like my wife hasn't seen it and she can go watch any movie going forward and it probably doesn't matter that she hasn't seen that special. It was its own thing. It's standalone. And I think that if they would do something more like where there was silos within and we got some of these cool characters, maybe that works out better. Or like you can set them up like Ironheart in Wakanda Forever. And then her show maybe doesn't tie into anything, so you can watch that if you want to. But if you don't want to, you're not missing out.
It's more optional. Well, yeah,
Right.
I think that's the part that should be made clear. What is the optional viewing versus what do you have to see in order to understand what's going on? And again, Dakota, maybe this comes down to my feelings. Like you say, there's the nostalgia piece. I don't think that's it only. But that piece of do I just go in and have fun and enjoy it? I understand.
Yeah.
I think that's easier for you to have that perspective. And I think there's a lot of other people that feel that way too. I would say for me, I think the MCU and pretty much leading up to Endgame, it would be like even if you had fun, it was still like, to me, I think the characters were thought out, the stories, those things. I think that's the part for me that is dipped. But I do have hope that they're bringing that back to kind of the consistency of quality between the projects. And I think maybe having it feel more like when you sat down to make the movie, this was kind of the vision for what the project would be and how it came to be, rather than some of these like reshoots, the last minute switches, the weird wonky CGI that you clearly had to do because you switched, the movie halfway through. And I think with Kevin Feige, I hope coming back in command, it will be more like there's a complete vision and it overall fits together a lot better. Is my hope.
Yeah, I feel like I almost have like I'm saying, like, you look back on nostalgia. I think I almost have like kind of like an I look back and I realize like when we were younger, like nobody knew who these characters are that I'm now seeing on a screen. So I feel like I almost have more of this like we've come so far. I'm not gonna dog on Moon Knight. Well, nobody didn't like Moon Knight, but like I'm not gonna be like, oh man, She-Hulk sucked, because it's like back then you never would have saw She-Hulk on screen. You never would have seen Ironheart on Wonder Man. Never would have had a thing back then. So I'm like, I mean, I want it to be good, but no matter how good or it is or isn't, it never would have happened back in the day. But now that Marvel is popular, I get to see my characters on screen. So I feel like that's where I give them a little bit more leeway.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, because it's like, would you rather have gotten these stories or not have anything at all? So
right,
maybe
that'd be a good episode. I would actually be curious to know, would people rather, like if you're a comic book fan, would you rather people still didn't know who these characters are and they don't get influenced by these movies? Because I think Doctor Strange seems like he's been very influenced by the on-screen representation of Doctor Strange. So like the comics have changed because of the movies. But that's a whole other discussion we don't have to get into right now, but that is interesting.
Well, stay tuned for that, folks. Should the MCU have ever been born? Next episode. Oh, that's a good title.
I like it.
Well, that is what we have, folks, for this new report on Kevin Feige, the behind the scenes of Marvel. You let us know, how do you feel about the quality of the MCU over the past few years? And do you feel more hopeful about this report? Does it make you feel like the MCU might be heading back in the right direction? You can go back and watch some videos on what we do with the MCU if you'd like, because we've got that kind of stuff too. Please be liking, sharing, and subscribing. And until next time, as always, stay strong.